Last weekend, I went to Epcot. I wanted to check out the new Guardians of the Galaxy coaster and wander around the World Showcase to see all the topiaries from the Flower and Garden Festival. It was 95 degrees outside and oh so humid. So as I walked around the World Showcase, I ducked into as many air-conditioned spaces as possible. This led me to an attraction that I had never experienced before called the American Adventure in the American Pavilion. This is a half-hour show-like experience in which American history is narrated by animatronic versions of Benjamin Franklin and Mark Twain. Animatronic versions of other historical American figures appear throughout the show, and the whole thing culminates in a montage detailing American history, politics, and culture from the 1950s to today, containing everything from JFK to Simone Biles to my personal favorite, Madonna. And if that sounds cheesy, it's because it was. However, there was one segment that stuck with me. An animatronic Franklin Delano Roosevelt giving his most famous speech, his first inaugural address. FDR began his presidency in the depths of the Great Depression. Americans were so desperate and hopeless. FDR's speech included this famous quote: "So, first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needless efforts to convert retreat into advance." Yes, this quote was also present in the Disney version. This quote has been sticking with me, especially as we read this week's Torah portion, Parshat Korach. Throughout history, the Jews have been no stranger to adversity. This is also true in the Torah. After enduring generations of slavery, the Israelites are forced to wander in the desert for 40 years. And as we learned last week, the 40 years part may have been their own fault, but that's neither here nor there. During this time, they've had to endure things like lack of water, lack of what they perceive as adequate food, attacks from their enemies, and oh yeah, they're in the desert. However, in Parshat Korach, the adversity comes from within. This week, we read about perhaps the most famous rebellion in the Torah. Korach, a Levite, gathers his friends Dotan, Aviram, and On, also prominent members of the community, and rebels against Moses. "Why do you have all the power?" demands Korach. "What makes you so special?" Now, Moses, despite all his flaws, is actually a pretty humble person. If we remember way back to Parshat Shemot, which we read several months ago, Moses didn't even want this job. He is embarrassed to speak in public, so Aaron speaks for him. He knows that he is in way over his head, and so he trusts that God will help him. Korach, on the other hand, just wants more power. Let's not forget he already has an important role in the community. He is a Levite, a priest, and a leader. Moses' response to Korach is actually quite predictable. "Let's have God decide," offers Moses. "Everyone who agrees with Korach, bring your incense to the tent of meeting, and we'll see what God does." God becomes angry with Korach's thirst for power and desire to undermine the sense of shared communal responsibility that God has tried to create among the Israelites in the desert. First, God opens up the earth where Korach and his friends are standing, and they are swallowed up. Then God makes the incense burst into flames, and 250 of Korach's followers are consumed. Even though God created these punishments, the Israelites blame Moses and turn against him. So God brings down a plague upon the rest of the Israelites. And the plague continues until Aaron atones for the community's sins. In all, 14,700 Israelites perish. This, of course, devastates the community. People grieve the loss of their loved ones and fear for their own lives. But in the end, the Israelites survive and even thrive. In just 2 weeks, we will read about how an evil sorcerer intends to curse the Israelites. but is only able to bless them after seeing their camp. And the Israelites eventually do make it to the land that God has promised them, the land flowing with milk and honey. In the case of Korach, infighting among the Israelites causes immense destruction in the community. However, throughout history, the Jewish community has also faced several external pressures. I want to talk about an elephant in the room for a moment: antisemitism. If you've watched the news or read the paper lately, and online counts too, you may have seen that last Thursday, several residents of Vero Beach woke up to find bags of rice with anti-Semitic flyers in their driveways. This week, you may have seen that this was not just in Vero Beach, but all over the Treasure Coast and much of South Florida. You may have a lot of feelings on what happened: sadness, fear, worry. I would be lying if I said that I myself weren't a bit anxious. But we have to band together at this time. Fortunately, we have so much support from the community, and not just from other Jewish communities. The sheriff's office has been taking extra special care of us during this time. So if you happen to talk to the deputies, make sure you thank them for all they do for us, not just now, but throughout the year. The interfaith community has been extremely supportive of us. Members of the interfaith community have been reaching out to check on both me and Rabbi Bernholtz. I've had colleagues from across the country ask if there is anything they can do. It's so refreshing seeing everyone coming together like this in support of the Jewish community in Florida. And during this time, we also need to remember FDR's wise words. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I'm not saying don't feel fear if that's what you're feeling. You're allowed to be human. What I'm saying is don't let fear paralyze you. We have a supportive community, and for that we can be grateful, and we can support each other too. If anyone personally needs support, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And if you forget FDR's lesson, I know of a great, albeit cheesy attraction at Epcot to help you remember. Did you know that we, the Jews, have our own version of FDR? His name is Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. He was the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, and he was an important figure in modern Hasidism. You may have heard this quote ascribed to him: Kol ha'olam kulo, gesher tsar me'od, v'ha'ikar lo lefached klal. In English, that's, the whole world is a very narrow bridge, and the most important thing is not to be afraid at all. However, he didn't actually say that. That comes from a song based on Rebbe Nachman, written by Baruch Chait, and it is a reworking of what Rebbe Nachman actually said. What he actually said was way more profound. V'da sheha'adam tzarich la'avor al gesher tsar me'od me'od, v'ha'klal v'ha'ikar shelo yitpached klal. This means, and know that a person needs to cross a very, very narrow bridge, and the whole of it, in the main thing, is that they don't freak themselves out at all. Not don't be afraid, but rather don't freak yourself out. We can't pretend that adversity doesn't affect us. That's disingenuous and it's not human. As we can see in Parshat Korach, the Israelites face so much adversity in the desert that they then create adversity for themselves, and everything snowballs and the community is affected. But we cannot freak ourselves out, which, as we saw, causes additional adversity in the aftermath of Korach's rebellion. We must remember how strong we are, lean on the rest of the community, and continue to be the light we wish to see in the world. After all, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.